So today we are going to be talking about how we work with accessibility in NAV. There are a lot of accessibility-related talks this year, so I just want to explain that this is not as a developer, this is what you do every day in working with the code. This is more of a talk talking about how we scale things, how we work efficiently, and in the context of NAV, of course. And we're a large organization, so that doesn't mean everything will apply to you, but I think you can pick and choose and find stuff that will help you integrate accessibility work in your organization. So let's have a look at why we need to scale. Because NAV is large, we manage around a third of the government budget each year. Of course, a lot of that is pension, it's not pay for us. But in NAV IT department, or I can say for those of you not from Norway, NAV is the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration. I always forget to say that. So we handle pensions, different welfare benefits, and so on. So in the IT department, we have around 800 employees, and that's not including consultants. So we are a lot of people. We have 9 product teams, product areas. Yeah, we should suppose to be product areas, where we kind of we collect different teams working in the same field. For example, things around family, things around employment, health, and so on. So those teams can work together and have synergies. And these areas range from 38 to 119 people in each area, with a range of, I don't know how many teams in each area. In total, there are 92 product teams, so maybe on average then should be around 10 teams per area. That varies a lot as well. And we share almost all code that we produce. So that means we have around 2,500 public GitHub repos as of now. I used the same numbers in Booster conference in spring, and that was 2,000 then. So it seems we're creating a lot of repos recently. And we push 2,432 deploys on average to production each week, which is a lot. And when we do that, we can't do these broad tests. We want to have a lot of time to test everything. We do test, but we need to spend our time wisely. And that's what I want to share today, how we work. Yeah, and some more behind the numbers is, if we include consultants, we have, Hans Christian just told me earlier, we have 937 developers as of now, or at least in our GitHub organization. We have 84 designers, we have 79 lawyers, which tells a lot about NAV, I think, but it's a complex area, and we need people telling us how the system should work, so it's good we have them. We have 32 data scientists, 189 subject experts, kind of the business side people working in the IT department, and around 22% consultants as of now. So that's enough numbers. It's not the most exciting, but it does tell why we need to scale. So, because of this, we need to think about how we set up our organization. So, for example, we want to avoid individual responsibility. We want to take accountability as a team or as a department or an organization, so that we don't have one person, for example, in accessibility, policing everyone else. That might work if you have a company of 20 employees, or maybe even approaching 50. But it doesn't help if you have almost 1,000 developers producing code each week. And because of this, we don't want to scale our work. So, for example, scaling work in this setting would mean just employing more people having responsibility for accessibility. We have, I think we'll come to that, but we have around 10 people who are accessibility experts in NAV. That's not nearly enough. So we can't just employ more people and solve it that way. Instead, we want to scale knowledge. We want to share knowledge with the teams, these 92 product teams. All of them, if they produce people-facing code or front-end, they need to know how to build and how to test and how to design for accessibility. And something we have, kind of a motto or a slogan, is that we want to create fart and fleet. It's not what you think. It's more speed and agility, which is, so that's in Norwegian. Yeah, so that's something we strive for. And that's the introduction today. Today, I will base this in 3 different parts of, or kind of viewpoints of how we work with accessibility. So we have the accessibility team, which I mentioned we are around 10 people in that. We have the design system team, which is where I'm actually employed. I just kind of moonlight in the accessibility team. And I'm also going to be talking about in-team accessibility work, so how we, or at least how I would recommend the teams working with accessibility in the daily life. Right. So the accessibility team has a lot of different responsibilities. As I said, training is one of them. So spreading knowledge, educating teams, helping them, could be anything from helping them get started when they know nothing about accessibility, that still happens, or it could be if they have specific needs and educating them on that. We also do consulting, so if a team, for example, has questions or they are supposed to perform some task but don't know how to do it, for example, when accessibility statements became a thing in the public sector, I'll go into that later, then a lot of teams needed help in how to go about testing this system, writing reports, and so on. So that's something we do. We have 2 different labs. We have the empathy lab. I'll show pictures, but it's somewhere. It's a setup where you could simulate disabilities. So, for example, loss of view, loss of hearing, and so on. And we also have the test lab where you can test your solution on actual users that you invite in. We are responsible for the accessibility statement, so that's something. And we also get involved in tender processes, or when we buy systems from third parties, because we are still responsible for the accessibility of that product even if we haven't developed it. And that's also applying to every one of each of you. If you use a third-party system and that faces the public, then you are, as an organization, are responsible for that. And we help with interpreting the law, because the law is dry and the law is complicated. So helping teams understand how to interpret different requirements is something we do as well. So let's go into the training first. All right. So as I do now, we do a lot of presentations, both outside the organization and in-house. We have different kind of internal meetups, or faggrupper and so on. So we go there and we talk about everything from ARIA, or just accessible design, inclusive design, how things impact different systems, how to work, and so on. We write best practice guides. Currently, there's a few people writing interpretations of WCAG, which is the international standard for accessibility on the web and in mobile applications, which a lot of people find difficult to read. It's not very accessible because it's so complicated. So we try to kind of make that easier, and we publish that on the design system website, axel.nav.no. A year ago, I started U-Forum, which is a faggruppe or internal meetup, for people just wanting to learn about accessibility. We have, for example, one for front-end as well, but this group has dived into the Vegard standard. We look into how we work with different assistive technology, and we also dive into more technical stuff. So next week, I'm going to be talking about ARIA and how that applies to people. And then we kind of run that less as presentation mode and more one person introduces the subject, and then we discuss it and dissect the material so everyone can kind of really understand and get the questions they face answered. So people shouldn't, they should understand it, and they should get feedback when they don't. We run a conference. It's in Norwegian. We call it Mangfold i Mai, so kind of diversity in May. It's been ranging how big it is. The largest years we've had multiple talks each day throughout May. I think lately we're more around 1 week, more concentrated, because it kind of created a lot of fatigue and took a lot of time. But that's where we kind of share that knowledge we build, both internally, but we also stream it, so most of it is open for the public, and the videos are still online on the mangfoldimai.no website. Right. So, consulting-wise, as the accessibility team, when product teams come to us, they usually have a specific matter they want help with. That can be, we have a team of full-stack developers that are really more back-end developers wanting to work in front-end as well, and we don't quite know how to approach accessibility, or we have found this specific bug and we don't know how to solve it, for example. Someone reported it and we can't reproduce it, and so on. And then we kind of work with the team. We won't do the job for them, but we can sit with them while they do it and talk through it. It can also be, for example, for testing an application, we will guide them through the testing, but the team itself will have to do the testing so that the next time they don't need to rely on us, they will have learned how to do it themselves. Yeah, that's more guided reviews. We also do workshops. So that can be everything from diving into accessibility testing, how to do automatic testing for accessibility, for example, is a workshop I've done a lot, or manual testing. And that's usually either for one specific team or more meetup-wise, where we can invite people to come in and learn. And we also have some members of the accessibility team that are kind of deployed to other teams, to a product team. For example, me and another guy, we work at the design system team. And we also have one at the hjelpemiddel, kind of assistive tools team. So we work there kind of permanently, or at least for a specific time, as a regular member of the team to introduce that perspective in the team. So usually it's for larger teams, but we do that sometimes as well. Right, more visual stuff. Empathy lab. As I mentioned, we have this setup where we can simulate disabilities. So I have some examples here. We have different glasses you can put on that simulate loss of vision. We have the glaucoma glasses at the top there, which will create kind of tunnel vision, so you see only that. And now you can use that to just learn how that impacts you in daily life, but you can also do it to sit down and test your system and see how that system is to use if you have that kind of disability. Cataract will create more of a blur vision, if I remember correctly. Then we have the gloves up on the right side. That is to simulate tremors in your hands. So basically, it gives you a little electric jolt every few seconds to make your hands kind of twitch. It's not painful, but it can be annoying. And if you want to operate a mobile phone, for example, that can be difficult. But also if you use a mouse and you kind of just shake the mouse or something, it's interesting to use that. And we have the headphones to simulate, I don't remember the English name, tinnitus. So kind of squeaking noise, like ee in your ears. And to have that constantly while trying to fill out a large application form to submit to NAV is not the easiest. If you really need to pay attention and we have this, you need to answer everything correctly, we will put you in jail stuff that we have stopped doing. We have different checkboxes for that now. We don't threaten you as much as we used to do. But if we do, and reality is still if you try to cheat NAV, lawyers will get involved. So a lot of people are really anxious when facing us. And if you have these kind of things that distract you while filling out a form, we need to simplify our systems to make it easier to have the user spend less time, for example. Right. Then, and we can use that in combination with the test lab. So the test lab is more of a setup just to test system. It isn't kind of accessibility specific. You can use it just to run regular user tests. But of course, if you want to test just with other members of the team, you can combine that with equipment from the empathy lab. So we have 2 rooms. Each room has a setup with a device. One of them is with a laptop. The other one is with a mobile phone. And the test subject will try to use your application in some way, website, an application, something like that. And you have the interviewer sits on the other side of the table and guides the user. And then we have vision tracking or eye tracking to see where the user looks at the website, for example, to find out how they find content, how they navigate, and so on. And so we have this set up with mobile phone. And to not overwhelm the user, we have a separate room for observation. So we don't want just one person testing with a lot of users. It's really useful to have the entire team pay attention and follow that as well to learn about it. So it's not, for example, just the designer doing this. We need developers, we need product owners and so on to learn how the system is to use. So they can sit in another team, they will see everything the user sees, they can see where the user looks at the website, and have as loud discussions about that as they want without impacting the user during testing. Right. So, accessibility statement, I mentioned that earlier. That is something that I think now 3 years ago around that became mandatory for public sector organizations. So that's not something that applies to private sector. But it means that you have to do a test of all your systems. Sorry. You need to test your systems and write this statement saying if you follow the law, which says that it should be accessible and there's a connection to the WCAG web standard. So you need to follow a specific number of guidelines, and you need to say if you don't. And then list where you don't do that, and kind of follow up to remediate those issues. And that's something the government will use when they look at which organizations come visit and have a more deeper look at how they apply to the law. Okay, yeah, so it's required. Okay, so last year I had a mistaken with how long ago. They did introduce a law earlier, but it applied from last year. So usually you have one per website, but if you have multiple websites that are kind of disconnected, you can have several. Yes. All right. So as I mentioned, if you buy third-party systems, of course the company building that system will have to know about and develop and design for accessibility, but it is your organization as a buyer and kind of the publisher of that system that is legally required to ensure accessibility in the product. So for NAV, that means we need to really do this because we face so many people in all situations of life. So the accessibility team will help with that by defining criteria for selection. Sorry. Yeah. And that is kind of the things we want to measure in the different submissions during the tender. And then after we select a few different products that we want to go further with in selection, we do summary reviews. So that's basically testing them and find out how accessible are they. And after we select a provider or a system, then we will work with the developer to make sure that accessibility is still a feature, that it's, if we find issues, that they are fixed, and so on. Right. So that's the accessibility team in large. Now I want to talk about Axel, which is where I work. We're the design system team at NAV. A lot of people might have heard about us. And in short, I think we're 5 developers, 3 designers, 1 accessibility specialist. That does not include me. I count as developer. We have a product owner, and we have the head of brand as part of the team because we want to kind of impact more than just components. Right. So it's a quite large design system team. We're really lucky there, but we find that that's kind of the minimum of what we need to handle an organization the size of NAV. So what we do is we build the axel.nav.no website. That's kind of the foundation for most of our work and where we publish stuff. We have, for example, the component library with our React components. We have design tokens that can be used for both designers, developers, and so on. Also for those not using a component library, because although now most of the teams that now use React, not everyone do or can. But they can use, for example, design tokens, which will say how do we do spacing, which colors do we use, and so on. And we have the icon library that is used also by organizations outside of NAV. We share everything publicly and it's free to use. So a lot of people do that. And then we also have documentation. So we have the foundation stuff we call grunnleggende here. We have god praksis, best practice stuff, where we publish, or we write some of that in Axel, stuff around design system, front-end web development, and stuff like that. But we also use this as a website for the rest of the organization, so they can write. We're more like a CMS in that part. So everything from product development to agile stuff to accessibility and so on, they publish stuff there. Yeah. We also recently added the templates, for example. Say more like how we want to build web pages, not just looking at individual components, which helps standardization. But as a team, we want to be slow-paced. We do not want to go fast and break stuff. That's not how design systems should work. some people, when they start the design system, they do that, and that's, in my view, a mistake, because they want to create stuff that other people can't. So this design system team is where they should build all of these components, and they should drive innovation. They want to be cutting edge. That's not how we look at it. We want to standardize. We want all of these product teams. We have 92 teams building stuff facing the users, and they know what the users want. As a design system team, we are far away from the user, from the end user. So we want the teams to innovate, want to test, and when they find stuff that works, we bring that into Axel. And this has proven that we can really scale this. Because as an 11-person team, then we can do this. If we want to build everything from basic and you test it and so on, that will take a lot of time. So the component library, we have around 50 React components today. Everything from just small things like how we design buttons to more complex things like a date picker or a combo box, kind of pull down with search. In addition to the React components, we also published the CSS as a separate file to allow for the teams that can't use React. And as I said, we test all of the components, all of the stuff we publish as components, so more like unit testing, both manually and automatic tests. But the testing of how this works with the users, as I said, is done in product teams. And because of that, it's really important to have feedback loops. So we set up a lot of different ways to get in contact with us. You could create GitHub issues, you can go on our Slack, or at least people from NAV can go on our Slack. We try to be visible in the community at NAV, in these internal meetups and so on, so people can talk to us and stuff like that. We also try to be visible just on Slack as individuals, so people can contact each one of us if they don't want to do so publicly. A lot of people don't want that. Right. So for best practice, that's kind of blogs or articles about different subjects. And those are written for internal use. It's specific for NAV. It's most like, this is how we do this in NAV, but we share it with everyone because we think that people can learn from what we do, like when I'm sharing today. Doesn't mean you have to do things the same way as us, but if we share, some people may learn, and we also will get feedback on what we do. So if someone discovers, like, okay, I see you do this, but maybe you should do this instead, we will learn from that. So we both benefit. And the fun fact is that in these articles, accessibility is the largest topic, which either means that our accessibility people are really, they love writing articles, or it means that people really want to read this. And I think the final one is the correct one. A lot of people look to that. Right. So in the, design system team, of course, we need to test all of the components and that they work in different browsers with different assistive technology, different platforms, and so on. So we have developers on both Windows and Mac. I think that's a really useful thing. We had a discussion earlier, a few speakers, and if you build stuff that is supposed to work for all users, you can't have everyone sitting on a Mac, for example, because your user won't do that. So it's really useful to have people on different operating systems, which will also mean that you can test with different screen readers. So we will test with VoiceOver. We will test with JAWS, which is more proprietary screen reader. And we will test with an NVDA. Sometimes we will also test with, for example, TalkBack on Android and so on. And because we have two accessibility specialists, of course we have some more experience than the normal team, but we also recommend to the teams that they do some testing. For example, with VoiceOver or NVDA, could also use Narrator on Windows, which is built in. Not because developers or designers know how to use a screen reader the same as a user, but more to just make sure that it's technically accessible. You need to test with the users to figure out if it's actually usable. And while we sit on different operating systems, it can also be helpful that each developer can test cross-browser, cross-operating system. So some of us have a license on BrowserStack, which is a useful tool to just test on a virtual machine in whatever setup you decide. So for example, a Windows developer testing on a Mac. Right. So this is kind of my tool in how to teach a team to work with accessibility, like in team. So I've created this model just based on my around 10 years experience working with accessibility. It's how I kind of structure my testing to get most results from my time to work cost efficiently. So basically, it's that I want to do testing with as little tools and as little knowledge required in the beginning, and then introduce more tools and stuff that requires more knowledge after I finish testing that. And that works for me as an experienced developer, but it can also work for a team just getting started, because, as I said, you can get started without any tools. So for the first step, you just test with the keyboard. So just make sure that you can tab to every element, press the tab key, that you can activate interactive components with either space or enter. You can close the modal with escape, for example. Just stuff like that. So that is things that you don't need to know how stuff are supposed to work, other than those few keys. And you don't have to install anything, and you don't have to have any setup. You don't have to run up a project other than what you have in your normal development process. After you do that, you can do zoom. So just resizing the window using controller command plus minus and so on to see that the page works responsibly. Again, that is something that doesn't require any setup. And if you have tested those two, I mean, you can't say that your system is accessible, but a lot of bugs you will find in those two first steps. So that's something you can do in just minutes. After that, I work or test structure. So that can mean different things. In this case, I will test heading hierarchy. So headings in HTML will be in H1, 2, and H6, and that creates a structure that assistive technology can navigate the page with. So it will create a tree with a H1 at the top, and from there we'll go to H2s, H3s, and so on, and branch out. And that's a way for the user can scan the web page as for example, a blind person using screen reader can scan this page that way, the same way we do visually. So when you look at a website, you will look for something that catches your eye and matches what you are looking for, and then read on from there. You won't read every little part of the web page from top to bottom. And if you do that with headings, and that structure is sound, then that's good for the user. Now, if you skip heading levels, or you don't care about the levels at all, so everything is an H2, for example, because that fit stylistically with the design, that won't help the user at all. Then they will have to read everything, and it's slower to consume content with a screen reader than it is just scanning with your eyes. So that's really impactful if you fix this. Now, in this step, I will need some tooling. I could, of course, go and look at the HTML, but that's slow. But I have a browser plugin called Headings Map in, for example, Chrome, that will just create this tree There's other tools as well. I think Wave does it and so on. When you just do this, and then you can just scan that tree and see that everything is as it should be, and it does make sense. You can just find, if you ignore the web page, you can just look at the tree and find the content you need, and so on. You can also, in this step, go into the HTML and look at landmarks, for example, if you are a bit more technical, but the rest of the stuff here is something anyone on the team can do. And that's a big part of this. I don't want accessibility to be something the designer does, or something the developer does, or something the tester does. It's a responsibility for the entire team. I want the product owners involved. I want the business side involved. And if we want to do that, we need, for at least the first steps of testing, something that should be something everyone can do. Now, after that, things become a bit more technical and requires more knowledge. So testing forms, you will need to know more about how stuff is supposed to work. But you can do a lot as well, manually and without any setup. So for example, just testing that labels are connected to input fields. It's really important, because if not, then a user of a screen reader won't know what to fill in. And you can do that without any tool. The only thing you need to do is click on the label. Now, if the focus is put into the input field, then it works. If it doesn't, then it doesn't work. And you can do that without having to look at the code. That is just something the browser will fix for you. So that's something that everyone can do, but you can also do testing of is error messages connected to the field, or how do you handle success or failure, and so on. So that's stuff that may require more technical knowledge and fits into this tool, into this step. And as we move up in the pyramid here, it's something I do less. So the first few steps is something I do for all code before I push a commit. Form testing, for example, is more of when we launch this feature, or of course before you're finished, but it's more on an interval. Automated tools could be a step further down if you just want to do a scan of the page. But in my experience, the issues here are oftentimes something that is something you can find early on in, for example, design, contrast-wise, and so on. And it requires a full page. It isn't useful to scan a page with just one component, for example. You need to test the full system. So either you do browser plugins, or you will introduce automatic testing in your build pipeline. And that's something you should, of course, run all the time, but it's not something you should spend time on every day. That's why it's further up. And if you have done all of these levels of testing, then it's time to start using screen readers. As I mentioned earlier, it's something you, at least as a developer, and maybe as a tester, and if you're a technical designer, then maybe do that as well. Just to test that the website works, test that you can navigate through, things are read out in a sensible way, and that's good enough for that level. That's something you can do. If you want to test that it's actually accessible, you need real users, and that's the final step. It's really expensive because you need to bring people in, they use their time, you need to find people with different disabilities, and so on. But that is the final step, and you need that to say that your website is accessible. Right. We are running out of time, but I'll have a few more slides. So for automated testing, I really recommend React Testing Library. It revolutionized front-end testing a few years ago because you can test with three different features. You can test the role of an element, which will tell you that this is a button, or this is a checkbox, and so on. You will test with accessible name, which is the textual representation of the element, the label of the input field, text in a button, and so on. And you can test state, which will mean that you can check that an element is checked or unchecked, open, closed, and so on. And if you combine that, that makes robust front-end tests, but it also ensures accessibility, because that is the same thing that's communicated to assistive technology, and that assistive technology relies on. So really use React Testing Library or any of the other test frameworks that have now adopted the same method. Don't use test IDs and so on, because that's not robust. This is. You can use Axe if you have integration tests or end-to-end tests. Just add Axe, which is just script for scanning the web page and find issues. You can do that basically on every step of the test. So if you open a model, or if you validate a field or a form, run it and check that everything works, not just when you load the screen. You want to test in every state. You should use linting, which will help provide quick feedback. We also use SiteImprove to scan our page regularly to provide reports. It's not something we look at all the time, but it's useful to see how we move. Are things becoming more accessible or less accessible? And finally, we have Accessibility Insights, which will help you with guided testing of the system instead of just automatic. Automatic tests can find a lot of issues, but not all. With the guided testing, you will approach full accessibility testing. Either Accessibility Insights or Axe Pro will help you find around, I think, 80–90% of issues. The next slide I want to skip. So, to summarize, I hope you learned something today. What I want to leave you with is that accessibility training is really important. You can't do everything on your own. So you need to involve your coworkers. Either if you are in a small startup or if you work in a big government organization, start spreading knowledge. We have a lot of people here that have spoken about accessibility and who knows a lot about that. Just share that with your colleagues. Don't depend on one kind of guiding star or one champion of accessibility, because that doesn't scale. You should scale it to fit your organization. You shouldn't do everything I've talked about today if you don't work in an organization of that scale. But find something and learn from that is what I hope I give you today. And you should remember that your organization is responsible for the accessibility of products you purchase. Either if you use some third-party system for doing forms for feedback, for example, that needs to be accessible. You need to think about that. There have been municipalities, for example, that has purchased systems for applying for kindergarten spaces, and that system wasn't accessible. It wasn't the organization developing that portal that had a problem, it was the municipality. So that's something to remember. A design system is usually worth the investment. Of course, there are 5 people working in an IT department. Maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not. But if you have an organization of some scale, then it's really useful. And finally, much of the impactful testing is really cheap to do. You can do a lot without any knowledge, and you can involve the entire team. But if you want to reach full accessibility, which you are required to by law, then you need to involve real users in the end as well, or as early as possible. Thank you for listening. Sorry I went a little over time. If you have questions, just come up to me afterwards, reach me out in the Explorer area, or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I shared these slides I did last week as well, so that link should be there. All right, thank you for listening.